For over 2,000 years, Christians have been gathering together to worship the risen Savior. That risen Savior said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not overcome it, shall not prevail against it." Where is that church that Jesus built? We live in a society in a day and age when everything is disposable. And there are those who began looking for the ancient faith, the unchanging faith, the faith that you see in the churches of Cappadocia, in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, the same church you see here at St. Elijah in Oklahoma City, that you see in Moscow in the Russian Orthodox churches there, or in Greece. We ask you now, invite you now, it is a joy to welcome you to another of our ancient faith seminars, Finding the Church That Jesus Built. Hello, I'm Subdeacon Ezra. I will be your host and lecturer for our seminars together. It is such a joy that you're part of this with us, and in order to enhance your experience as we spend our time together, I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to get this course manual that accompanies the lectures, Finding the Church That Jesus Built. This over 500-page manual has outlines of each of our seminars, as well as appendix material that goes along and is coordinated with each of the seminars that will give you background information and further readings that you can do to learn more about the topic that we have just done. There's information at the bottom of the screen how you may obtain your own course manual, and I urge you to do so. It's been prepared especially for you, and I know it's going to enhance your seminar experience. It is a joy now to go to our seminar this evening. If I were to ask you what your name is and to tell me something about yourself, you would be able to do that. And if we had the time for every one of us to do that, we could all share some personal history. And I actually hope over our 8 weeks together that we will get to know one another and get to know each other, which is why we wear the name tags. And we're going to take a break around 8 o'clock, and that gives us a chance to relax a little bit and learn something about one another. But we would all have our own personal history, our own family history. That is also true for the church. And so what we're going to be looking at is letting the church introduce us to her and her history. And that's what we're going to be looking at here. And you've got a map there on page 8 of the Roman Empire. It looks something like that. It's close. No cigar, but it may be close in the process that we have. And what we're looking at is Christianity is born here in Jerusalem with the resurrection of Jesus. And what we're looking at is the history of the church he built. That's what we're going to be looking at in our weeks together. And so we want to get an overview of where we are in history this evening. So we're just going to kind of nail down some of the overview and see what begins to happen. Christianity begins to spread outward from Jerusalem. It's going to spread northward to Antioch. It's going to spread southward to Alexandria. And it's going to spread westward to the city of Rome. And so Christianity begins to take hold inside the large urban centers of the Roman Empire. It is where the people are and inside these cities and where the trade routes are. Obviously, we've also got churches in Macedonia and in Greece and all of Turkey and Cappadocia and this whole region here as the gospel begins to spread throughout the Roman Empire. And we have here on page 9 the verses out of the book of Acts that tell about that spread of Christianity as it begins to spread and so forth. And we have the apostles that are overseeing this spreading of Christianity, the spreading of the church, and that story is there. And those of us that perhaps come from a religious background and are used to reading the book of Acts would know something about the spread of Christianity, how it goes to Antioch, and the missionary journeys, particularly of St. Paul and St. Peter in that process. And you had then these apostles who are overseeing the spread of Christianity. And we've got verses there where in item number C and item number D. And the apostles began to appoint overseers in their place known as bishops. And so by 69 AD, you begin to have strong churches, and the apostles are beginning to leave behind them then others that are now in charge of overseeing a particular region. In our bookstore, we have this little book called The Orthodox Church, written by Timothy Ware, who is a professor at Oxford University in England. It is easy to read, and so it's a good place to start if you want more detailed history of what we're going to just do in a sketch this evening. Also, we have a book called The Apostolic Fathers. These are the writings of the men that the apostles appointed to lead after them. And their writings have been collected into this collection called the Apostolic Fathers. And we will be referring to different passages out of the Apostolic Fathers from time to time. And I've got some that are cited here and quoted for us here. And so I just mention these as we go along, that because I'm going to be talking about early church history, and I'm talking about stuff that a lot of us have, where did that come from? I didn't know that. I've never heard that. And so if you're interested, I'm wanting you to be able to lay your hands on the sources for the material that we're talking about is what we have there. As the church spreads outward, it begins to run into opposition inside the Roman Empire. I'm on page 10 at item number 2, Roman persecution. It begins in 64 AD, where you're going to have the Emperor Nero, and St. Peter and St. Paul will be the two best known of those that are going to be martyred for being Christians at this particular time. Now, not every emperor was trying to kill all the Christians. It was sporadic at first. And we've got a list of the emperors here who began to carry on this program. You have Trajan, and during his reign, St. Ignatius of Antioch, who was the second bishop of Antioch, who was the child that Jesus placed on his lap when he said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," and was then commissioned to be the leader of the church in Antioch that we read about in the book of Acts. He is going to be fed to the lions in Rome in AD 116. We have 6 or 7 of his letters that he wrote to the churches on his way to die. And they are collected here in this collection, the Apostolic Fathers. And so St. Ignatius would be the most prominent person who's going to be one of the martyrs in that era. Then you have Emperor Hadrian, and then you have Antonius Pius, their item number D. And the most prominent one there is St. Polycarp. Polycarp was a young bishop, and St. Ignatius, on his way to die, wrote him a letter. And we have the letter that Ignatius wrote to Polycarp, and then years later, Polycarp himself is going to be martyred. And we also have an account in here, the martyrdom of Polycarp. And so you're beginning to see that from time to time, there begins to be this persecution, and the church was willing to die for her faith. She was willing to die that the message she was preaching, the message that she was believing was the truth. And so these men and women, and countless men and women whose names we do not know,
and are now known only to God himself, chose to die rather than betray their faith. By the time you get to 249 under Decius, you begin to have an empire-wide persecution. And by the time you get to Valerian in 253, it is now an automatic death penalty for attending the church. If you're caught there, it begins to be an automatic death sentence. And then there's going to be 40 years of peace until 300 AD, and then the roughest period begins under Diocletian between 303, 313. And this is the first time you actually have the wholesale torture and slaughter of Christians. Whole villages have converted to Christianity in Lebanon and Syria and in Turkey and in Greece and in Italy. And the soldiers would come and surround that entire village that was now Christian and set it on fire, and either let the inhabitants burn to death, or as they tried to escape the fire, would be there with their swords and their spears to slaughter them as they came out of the flames. So this is the kind of persecution that the church was enduring, and the kind of widespread tyranny that was beginning to happen by the time you get to the 300 ADs. It is estimated at the end of Diocletian's reign that somewhere between 20 and 50% of the Roman Empire had converted to Christianity. It is an incredible statement that people dying for their faith spoke loudly enough that the Roman Empire is going to be converted to Christianity. Now that presents us with a backdrop that brings us then to the events that are found there on page 11, from Rome to Constantinople. Let us talk about a man named Constantine the Great. Constantine the Great is the son of a Roman emperor. At this time in the Roman Empire, there are two emperors. They have divided the empire into an eastern part and a western part, and you have a ruler over both parts, and then you have the Caesars, and the Caesars rule the armies in behalf of the other rulers of the empire. And Constantine has been with his father, and they have been in Gaul, which is today called France, and they have conquered there. I think they were in England as well, and had defeated some enemies there. And while they were in Gaul, his father dies, and the troops declare him their new leader, their new Caesar, not unlike what you saw in the movie The Gladiator. That was the title of it, right? The Gladiator, where the difference is the troops there wanted to declare the good guy to be this, and of course it's a movie, so the bad guy gets the honor instead. But in real life, Constantine, a real good soldier, the son of the Caesar, was in fact declared Caesar by his troops, and he begins to move his army from Gaul towards the city of Rome, so he can be officially inaugurated. Well, there's another rival general that wants to be declared the Caesar as well. His name is Maxentius. Now, Maxentius is moving with his army towards Rome, and there's going to be a battle. And on the way to that appointed battle, Constantine has a vision. He is going to see in the sky a sign, and he's going to hear the words "Into to Nike." Now, into to Nike in the Greek, Nike, if we make it into the English alphabet. We've heard that word before, haven't we? Nike. It means to conquer. It's a great symbol to wear on your shoes, I guess, or your hat while you're in some sort of athletic competition. Now, obviously, I'm no artist, but we would somehow recognize, maybe, is that the swoosh? The Nike symbol? well, you got to stretch your imagination to get there, I realize, but if I were Tiger Woods walking in here and you saw my sleeve, you would know that who had paid me to wear that shirt. You would know Nike had paid me because you saw the symbol. We call them logos, right? Constantine saw a logo in the sky, but it was not the swoosh that he saw. What he saw was the cross of Jesus Christ, and heard those words, "By this conquer, by this be victorious." If you'll hold your hand right there and turn over to page 44A. 44A. On 44A, we have some passages from Eusebius. He wrote the first church history, and these are reprinted from it on page 44A. How, while he was praying, chapter 28, God sent him a vision of a cross of light in the heavens at midday with an inscription admonishing him to conquer by that. Accordingly, he called on him with earnest prayer and supplications that he would reveal to him who he was and stretch forth his right hand to help him in his present difficulties. And while he was thus praying with fervent entreaty, a most marvelous sign appeared to him from heaven, the account of which it might have been hard to believe had it been related by any other person. But since the victorious emperor himself long afterwards declared it to the writer of this history. In other words, the emperor personally told Eusebius, this is what happened. And so Eusebius is telling it the way the emperor told him. When he was honored with his acquaintance and society, and confirmed his statement by an oath, who could hesitate to accredit the relation, especially since the testimony of aftertime has established its truth? He said that about noon, when the day was already beginning to decline, he saw with his own eyes the trophy or symbol of a cross of light in the heavens above the sun, and bearing the inscription, "Conquer by this." At this sight he himself was struck with amazement, and his whole army also, which followed him on this expedition and witnessed the miracle. How the Christ of God appeared to him in his sleep, and commanded him to use in his wars a standard made in the form of a cross. He said, moreover, that he doubted within himself what the import of this apparition could be. Sounds like Scrooge, doesn't it? What does this mean, Spirit? This is heavy stuff, but we're going to have fun too, all right? I mean, he's this Roman general, and he has this vision, and what do you make of this? And while he continued to ponder and reason on its meaning, night suddenly came on. Then in his sleep the Christ of God appeared to him with the same sign which he had seen in the heavens, and commanded him to make a likeness of that sign which he had seen in the heavens, and to use it as a safeguard in all engagements with his enemies. Next page. The making of the standard of the cross. At dawn of day he arose and communicated the marvel to his friends, and then calling together the workers in gold and precious stones, he sat in the midst of them and described to them the figure of the sign he had seen, bidding them represent it in gold and precious stones. And this representation I myself have had the opportunity of seeing. So Eusebius is not only hearing the account, but he actually saw what got made. And now here's the description. Now it was made in the following manner. A long spear overlaid with gold formed the figure of the cross by means of a transverse bar laid over it. On the top of the whole was fixed a wreath of gold and precious stones, and within this the symbol of the Savior's name, 2 letters indicating the name of Christ. By means of its initial characters, the letter Rho, looks like P to us, intersected by Chi, looks like X to us, in its center. And these letters the emperor was in the habit of wearing on his helmet at a later period. From the crossbar of the spear was suspended a cloth, a royal piece, covered with a profuse embroidery of most brilliant precious stones, and which being also richly interlaced with gold, presented an indescribable degree of beauty to the beholder. This banner was of a square form, and the upright staff, whose lower section was of great length, bore a golden half-length portrait of the pious emperor and his children on its upper part, beneath the trophy of the cross and immediately above the embroidered banner. The emperor constantly made use of this sign of salvation as a safeguard against every adverse and hostile power, and commanded that others similar to it should be carried at the head of all his armies. So what's being described is a long spear covered with gold, a cross spear covered with gold, and then there is a wreath. And I'll make a big wreath here, a circle. And inside this circle, and this wreath's going to hang right here at the top of the cross, is going to be the first two letters of Christ in Greek, which is, in the Greek language, Christos. And so these first two letters are put there, and they're put like this as the symbol inside. This is called the chi, this is the rho, known as the Chi-Rho symbol then. Sometimes you will see it like this, but Emperor Constantine did it this way as two separate letters in the center of the cross, of the wreath that's here on top of his standard. And then he had a huge banner here that's described, and another trailing down from that is there. And this is what he went into battle with against Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge. And now we're back over to page 11 where we were. That battle takes place in 312 A.D. Constantine's army will defeat Maxentius at that battle of the Milvian Bridge outside of Rome, and Constantine then will become Caesar of the West, the ruler of the West. The ruler of the East lived here in Nicomedia, which is in this location in what is today northern Turkey, and he takes and travels across here, and Constantine and Licinius meet in Milan, Italy, which is in the northern part of Italy, and they will issue there the Edict of Toleration, also known as the Edict of Milan, in 313 A.D., which for the first time declares you can be a Christian without penalty of death. It was no longer against the law to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. Well, this is a great turning point in the story of the church and the life of the church. She's no longer fighting for her life, and things are going to change, and the empire openly then is going to convert to Christianity almost in mass. Masses of people are going to start coming into the church, so many, in fact, that it's hard for the church to digest them all, to absorb them all in the process that's there. Constantine then is going to eventually, he's been the emperor of the West. He's already been to England with an army. The only place left open to him to conquer is the same place that was left open to Alexander the Great 600 years earlier. And that is going to be westward to India. And so in order to go westward to India, he needs to move the capital of the empire away from the Mediterranean and move it into the center of this landmass so he can equally go to India, as well as go to England if need be. And so there is an old city here on the north side of the Bosphorus known as Byzantium. And he is going to have it leveled and is going to begin rebuilding a new city there to be the capital of the Roman Empire. It is going to be called the New Rome. And in Latin, that is the Novum Romanum, New Rome. And this was the title of the city. But no one has ever called it Novum Romanum. It was only called the New Rome. in the documents. This document was signed on such and such a day in Novanum Romanum, in New Rome. But for the whole world, it was known as the city of Constantine, which in the Greek language is pronounced Constantinople. And so he creates then Constantinople on the ruins of Byzantium. And I'm going to put a C here because at this point I want to call your attention to the fact that you now have 5 major centers of Christianity inside the Roman Empire. You have Rome, you have Constantinople, you have Antioch, you have Jerusalem, and you have Alexandria in Egypt. You have 5 major centers of Christianity. They're really kind of easy with your hand to do, just going around the Mediterranean. Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. These are the 5 centers. There is no earthly head of Christianity for the church. You have bishops. A bishop oversees churches in his area. 50 churches perhaps, so he can be in a church every Sunday or something like this. All bishops are equal to all other bishops. There's only one bishop for a geographical area. There are not 2 bishops in an area, only one, and they oversee ordaining priests for new churches, and if a priest dies, then they replace that priest, and if God forbid the priest is lazy and doesn't do what he needs to do, or does something and gets into trouble, then they replace the priest. So they are administrators. They are kind of governors, if you will, over a particular area. And these 5 major centers have a bishop, and this bishop begins to not only oversee his city, but when the bishops of Italy meet together to discuss whatever affairs the church is there, the bishop of the largest city gets to be the presider of the meeting. He has no more power, but he has the place of honor of being the presider. And they began to be called patriarchs. Patriarchs as a title of honor. They're not a dictator, they're not a king, but they help oversee the spread of Christianity in their geographical region and oversee the other bishops when they, from time to time, all the bishops meet together in a group. We call those councils or synods. And the area that they oversaw is called a patriarchate. So you have a patriarch, and he oversees a patriarchate. And the early church always used the language of the people. So when the church is in Jerusalem, it used Aramaic. When it's in Antioch, it used Aramaic as the language of the people. When it goes to Egypt, it's going to use Coptic as the language of the people. When it goes to Greece, it's going to use Greek as the language of the people. When it went to Italy, it used Latin as the language of the people. And so a patriarch was overseeing a geographical region that used a particular language. So since Latin is the language of Italy and of Germany, France and Spain and England inside the Roman Empire, over here, this is going to be the Patriarchate of Rome. This becomes the Patriarchate of Constantinople. Antioch was the Patriarch of Antioch and all the East, as far as India, overseeing where the Arab populations were. Now, Jerusalem was just kind of primarily limited into the Holy Land, and then Alexandria would have been Egypt and Ethiopia and northern Africa and across and so forth. So this is where Christianity was as its beginning, as it begins to spread. So we have the spread of Christianity. There is no earthly head to the church. You have a collection of bishops who get together and oversee administrative details, just like we read about in the book of Acts, chapter 15, where there was that apostolic council that had to decide whether or not Gentiles had to first become Jews before they could become Christians. And so the church decided no. God is universal and going to all people, and we don't become Jews. We don't have to receive circumcision in order for this. And so that's how the church is operating. In 400 A.D., and now I'm on the bottom of page 11, 400 A.D., an event is going to happen that is going to have great significance. That event is going to be that coming from north of the Alps, you have Germanic tribes, Goths, Visigoths, Vandals, that we get our word Vandals from, and vandalism from, all these tribes, the Huns and so forth, that are going to come, and they will actually sack the city of Rome in about 400 A.D. I think the actual date is 410 A.D., but roughly speaking, around 400 A.D., they're going to sack the city of Rome. They don't stay there forever, but this sacking of the city of Rome creates a psychological crisis in Italy. And there's a group of people that blame the sacking of the city of Rome on the Christians. It's all this lovey-dovey stuff, turn the other cheek stuff. If we didn't do all this, if we still worship the old gods, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, the old Roman gods. Now, there were some gods to be proud of, I'll tell you. If we still honored them, we would have defeated the barbarians. And so they began to blame the Christians. And in response to that blame, a bishop of Hippo in northern Africa, one of the strongest centers of Christianity at the time, by the name of Augustine, is going to write a defense of Christianity. He will write a book called The City of God. Next to the Bible itself, it is the most significant book in shaping Western history and Western culture. But I've never heard of it. I'm aware of that. But if we had the time, I think I could show you how not only did it shape Western civilization directly for 1,000 years, but it still shapes the United States today, and particularly still shapes American Protestant Christianity today. It's no small book, by the way. It's thick, and it's got small print. The City of God by St. Augustine. Next to the Bible, as I've said, a highly significant book that's going to establish the place of Christianity and the role of Christianity in the West. The West is going to enter a period of that's known as the Middle Ages, that time frame between 400 A.D. and the rebirth or the Renaissance. It's going to happen around 1400 A.D. Later on, Voltaire is going to call it the Dark Ages because he was anti the church, anti-faith. And so if it was the age of faith, it had to be the age of darkness. And because he now was enlightened and created the Enlightenment, where we no longer needed God and anything that had to do with God, he therefore called that period the Dark Ages. And so in the West, from here over, in the Patriarchate of Rome only, there's the Dark Ages. There's the Middle Ages. And we're going to look at this second, but I want to point this out. All the rest of the Roman Empire never went through the Dark Ages. They never went through political decline in this way. They did not go through the lapse of learning. They didn't go through the lapse of people knowing how to read and write. They still had art. They still had music. They still had civilization. They still had culture. They still had their libraries. They still painted and they still read. They still had their schools in the East, unlike the history that's going to happen inside the Patriarchate of Rome. So we're going to look at that here for just a little bit. This is going to happen and begin happening in 400 AD. I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I think I'm going to go down to, well, I'm going to be at the top of page 12. I'm going to skip Islam at the moment, and I'm going to skip item number 7. So we're going to deal with this and go to 8, and we'll try to lump these two together if we can. Continuing from the north, you begin to have German tribes that began to infiltrate Gaul. So many are going to infiltrate Gaul that they will give their name to that land. This German tribe was from the area around Frankfurt, Germany. They were the Franks, and so many Franks came to live in Gaul that it became the land of the Franks, or the French, or is called France. It's a softened way of saying it, but France is really a German nation, having been Germanized. Now, Islam is going to sweep out of Arabia and across northern Africa, and I won't have much time to talk about Islam this evening, other than to say Islam is a Christian heresy. Coming after the councils of the church, we'll spend some time with the councils, and Arianism and Nestorianism, and Muhammad had been influenced by a Christian heretic priest, a Nestorian priest, that denied the divinity of Christ, and so you have the denial of Christ in Islam and so forth. Be that as it may, this is going to come across and sweep here, and so Islam is attacking the Roman Empire. The Germans are no longer attacking, they are infiltrating. They are moving in and seeing themselves become Romans. They're becoming citizens of this area, and they began to convert to Christianity. And as they convert to Christianity, the Germanizing of the Patriarchate of Rome begins to happen. The Franks have great leaders and rulers, the greatest of which was Karl de Grosse, known to us by his other title, the French title, Charlemagne, who in 800 AD is strong enough that he brings charges, threatens the Pope with, I will bring moral charges against you unless you cut a deal with me. And the deal is that the Pope is to crown Charlemagne as the emperor of a brand new country, or a brand new empire that is going to be very close to the boundaries of the Patriarchate of Rome. It's going to go up from here, whether it takes Romania, part of Romania, Czechoslovakia, what is all of those nations up through Eastern Europe, including Germany and England and around. The Pope agrees, and on Christmas Day, 800 AD, Charlemagne is in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and suddenly and without warning, the Pope just places the crown on his head and says, I declare you Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Well, pardon my skepticism that it happened quite that way. Charlemagne had engineered it. And from that moment on, we began to have more and more pressure on the papacy. Charlemagne needs to break the church away, the Western church away from the rest of the church, because he needs it to be the he needs it to be the religion of his new empire. He needs it to be the social glue that will authenticate him and his power. That the priest, the Pope, has placed the crown on his head. In the East, you didn't have bishops placing crowns on emperors' heads. That was a secular function being declared. And so it's only here in the West that this whole battle that we call church and state begins to happen in this regard. Charlemagne calls all of the bishops of his kingdom here together, and while the Seventh Ecumenical Council is going on over here in Nicaea, Charlemagne has a council that will repudiate everything else the church is doing. In the West, coming out of Spain, the creed begins to be changed by the church. They begin to alter the creed and say it differently here than it's said everywhere else in the world. Charlemagne begins to enforce that, and by the 1000s, the only place in the West where the original creed of Christianity is still said is by the Pope at St. Peter's. Is going to be there. In 1015, 1017, somewhere along here, the Pope finally surrenders the creed and begins to recite the new creed in St. Peter's. When this begins to happen, we're going to take a break here in just too many dates. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move us fast along. What we have is this all starts in 800, and within 200 years, we now have a tug of war between German popes and German emperors, and that whole papal, anti-papal conflict that's going on. And in the creed is finally surrendered by, say, 1015, give or take. I don't know if it's in your notes or not. And then in 1054 A.D., the Bishop of Rome will break away from the rest of Christianity and will create his own church. Now, there had been a church at Rome from the beginning. This had been one of the first centers of Christianity, along with the other four that we've talked about. But there was only one church up until 1054. After 1054, there were now two churches. The Church of Rome began to use the title Roman Catholic Church. The word Catholic is meaning the universal church. It's just part of our creed that was used. And so they used that as their title. Well, if they take a name, you have to have a name for the other church. As long as they're just the church, you don't need a name. They're just us. But now that this church has come into existence, what are we going to call the church? And it begins to be called Orthodox. Which means, loosely translated, we're the right ones. You know, in golf, if someone has an orthodox swing, they've got the correct swing. That's just what the word means, the right glory, the right presentation. So the Orthodox Church. And they begin to go by, this is the West. So, why don't I get another magic marker that's green or purple or blue or something so we can, how about brown maybe? We divide the Roman Empire then into the West. This is known as East. We have Western Christianity, we have Eastern Christianity. We have Latin Christianity, and the language often used in the church here for its theology and when it met in councils is going to be Greek, just like English today is used in so many countries as a universal language, though people speak their own native languages in their own regions. So you have the Western Church, the Eastern Church, the Latin Church, the Greek Church. You're going to have the Catholic Church, and you're going to then have the Orthodox Church. So what we're looking at is beginning to answer the question, where did they come from? Well, this is how it started. This is the history of the church. And it's the history of how we got the West created, and how the West is breaking away and creating a different kind of Christianity from that which had always been the Christianity of the church that is there. Now that's probably a pretty good stopping point now that we've got this here, so that we can come back after our break and see if we can't make it from 1054 to maybe the 21st century. We're going to try, by the grace of God, okay? So let's take a break. There ought to be some goodies down there, something to drink or something. We'll come back in just a few minutes. Thanks.
I'm glad that you are participating in this with us through the marvel of modern technology. And again, I want to remind you that this course manual, Finding the Church That Jesus Built, will enhance your learning experience as we do these seminars together. Again, I remind you, at the bottom of the screen will be information how you can obtain your own copy. And I urge you to do so. It's been prepared especially for you and designed to go with these series so that you will have in your hands the exact...
Well, I hope you enjoyed your break. I'm glad to welcome us back now to the conclusion of our first evening together. The events leading up to what is called the Great Schism, the splitting away of the Patriarchate of Rome. Remember, we had 5 centers of Christianity, 5 brothers: Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. And after 1054, the Bishop of Rome was no longer part of them, has gone his own way, and has created the church that is in the West. And in your book that you have there, beginning on pages 444C and following, we won't turn to it right now. I mean, we don't have time, sorry. But you can find information there that relates to Charlemagne, relates to the events that led up to 1054. And there's whole books written on that. So obviously I'm just trying to skim everything as quickly as we can and so forth. But what does happen after 1054, we now have 2 churches. And then the next significant event, if we had 300 and Constantine is converted as a significant event, if you have 400 AD, the attack on the city of Rome as a significant event, and the writing of the city of God being that event that's going to shape the Western mindset and Western culture out of Augustine. And we'll have more to say about this several weeks from now when we deal with the subject of salvation. Then 800 AD and the crowning of Charlemagne is another significant event that is going to lead us to 1054, this great split that happens. And then between 1100 and 1300, we have the Crusades. I need to clear the board just a little, don't I? Maybe we can still see the map inside there. But what we have beginning from 1100 to 1300 are going to be 7 crusades that are, the bumper sticker that they put on the back of all the wagons said, "Let's free the Holy Lands." But in reality, what you had with the crusades was the Christian West attacking the Christian East. When they would go and attack a Islamic stronghold and defeat at that stronghold, rather than liberating the Christians in the area, they, the Crusaders, established that as a Latin county, a Latin province. and established a Latin-speaking Roman Catholic church with a Roman Catholic clergy that then paid civil taxes and tithes back to Italy. When the Crusaders attacked, the Christians of the East stood side by side with the Muslims of the East and fought against the Western invaders. The evidence of this, and it's kind of amazing, our humanities textbooks may talk about the First Crusade, may talk about the Second Crusade, and then we'll say nothing much happened, nothing of any importance happened after these crusades. And I'm going, yikes! Tell me about the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade, 1204 AD, leaves Venice ostensibly to go to attack the Islamic navy wintering in Alexandria. But on the way there, they get here and do a 90-degree left turn and sail to Constantinople and attack it. There's not a Muslim anywhere in sight. The Christian West attacks Constantinople and for 3 days rapes and pillages the city. And when they leave, they bring back the gold, they bring back the silver, they bring back the loot, they bring back the art, they bring back the paintings, they bring back the sculpture, they bring back the books to Venice. And our history books used to say, and our humanities books, we don't have any clue what caused the Renaissance to happen. Well, for crying out loud. You just brought it, imported it. The Crusaders brought the Renaissance back with them. And the money they brought back financed it. And you begin to then have a rebirth of culture and learning in the West that we call the Renaissance. Now, I must also tell you that when Augustine wrote his book, The City of God, let's see if I can clear this off just one more time a little bit. When he wrote The City of God, he used and relied on the philosophical system of Plato, one of the great ancient Greek philosophers that had lived around 400 BC. He used Plato and Plato's way of thinking. Now, Plato had a student named Aristotle. Aristotle took the exact opposite approach from Plato. And Aristotle became the second or the third giant of ancient Greek philosophy. And I should hurriedly tell you that Aristotle also had a very famous student, Alexander the Great, who put into practice much of Aristotle's practical philosophy and so forth. You have the two great giants, Plato, and Augustine is going to use him. And because this book dominated Western culture, Aristotle is almost completely forgotten in the West. All Western thinking for about 1,000 years is going to be based on Plato as they had him in this book by Augustine. But when the Crusaders came back, the Crusaders brought with them Aristotle. And when they brought Aristotle with them, he begins to be translated, and you begin to have the birth of schools in the West, Scholasticism is going to be born. Universities are going to be created. And all this stuff that was brought back from the East is going to be studied. And one of the things that happens with that is a man named Thomas Aquinas is going to read Aristotle and is going to rethink Catholic theology based on Aristotle. And he's going to write the book called The Sum of All Theology, Summa Theologica. Now, let me see if I can illustrate it this way for you. We have Augustine plus Plato, and this gave us Catholic Western theology. Gives us Catholic theology. From 400 on. After the Crusades, after 1204, you begin to have this coming on. We get Aquinas. Aquinas is a little earlier than that. Starts the process. Aquinas plus Aristotle is going to give us new Catholic theology. With me? If this is new Catholic theology, once you've got new, what does that make this? Old. So now I'm going to call this Old Catholic theology. New Catholic theology is in Italy, it's in France. It's part of the whole new way of thinking that comes with the Renaissance. It's that whole new way of, there's painting and there's art and everything is alive and there's great energy. And the birth of the great cathedrals is beginning, and all of the stuff of the great masters of the Renaissance is happening. But it had not yet taken hold north of the Alps. German peasants would make a pilgrimage to Rome. And they walk into the Sistine Chapel and look up to worship God, and yikes! It's naked bodies everywhere. They're scandalized. I mean, what's going on? And there's going to be a reaction in Germany against everything happening south of the Alps. And this reaction is going to be led by an Augustinian monk. A monk who is a member of the Augustinian group. That means they are committed to Augustine, his understanding. And this monk's name is Martin Luther. Martin Luther is going to be joined by John Calvin in Geneva and by Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich, Switzerland, to become the three great giants of this protest movement. They are protesting the Renaissance, and they are protesting this new Catholic theology. It's the old fight between Plato and Aristotle that's actually happening. And because they protest, they become the Protestants that we now pronounce as Protestants. And so Protestant theology at its heart is Old Catholic theology. Roman Catholic theology today at its heart is New Catholic theology. Now, the New Catholic theology does not throw everything of Augustine out. And so they share, so you have two versions of Catholic Western Christianity. The Roman Catholic version and the Protestant version of Christianity. Inside of that, if we are Roman Catholics, we know where our roots are. If we are Protestants here this evening, we would be able to know our own particular denomination's history inside of this. This is all going to happen in 1500. Is when this begins. And by 1550, Henry VIII has had a problem with wanting another wife. And so, in order to divorce her, he creates his own church that'll let him do that. And we create the Anglican Church. Out of the Anglican Church, begins to buy into the Puritan theology that you get from Geneva and John Calvin, the Protestants here, going back to Augustine's book again. And from there, you're going to get James, who's going to eventually come to the throne. James comes from Scotland. He's a Presbyterian, good Calvinist in his thinking. But in order to be a good Anglican, he has to stop the Puritans from destroying his kingdom. And he runs the separatist group out. They end up getting on board a ship called the Mayflower, come to the United States, and suddenly we're part of the story. And on it goes as this Western tug-of-war is happening. So the United States is created out of, in part, with primarily those that did not like the king settling in New England and those that liked the king settling in the South. That's why our southern states are all named after a monarch. Virginia, the Virgin Queen, Elizabeth. Carolina, you're going, well, who was that? Well, it's for the Latin Carolus, which is for Carl, which in English is Charles. And so you had King Charles, and so the Carolinas were named for him. And Georgia, of course, was named for King George. Maryland wasn't named for Queen Mary. It was actually named, it was a Catholic colony, so it's named for the Virgin Mary as a Catholic colony. But the northern states were all, there's not a monarch above them, in them. You got Jamestown is as far north as you're going to get, I think. And you're going to have Charleston, but all this is in the South. So the South was pro-monarchy, and the North was the hot-headed Puritans bent on establishing heaven on earth in their own system. That's our part of the story. We all know this, some way or the other. But we don't know what happened over here. What was going on? Well, over here, they're fighting for their lives against Islam. Persia is beginning to rise, and so the church, the only area left open to the church was to go north through the Balkans, into Romania, Albania, out of Macedonia, beginning to go north then, and converts these populations, begins to convert the Slavs, and in 988, the Ukraine and Russia was converted to Christianity. 988. Russia has been a Christian nation for over 1,000 years, celebrating 1,000 years, a millennium of being Christian in 1988. Communism was only there for 70 years, but Christ has been there for 1,000 inside of Russia. And so the church is here. After the sack of Constantinople in 1204, that Fourth Crusade, this severely weakened the Roman Empire in the East. Islam has already conquered Jerusalem, has already sacked Antioch, had made an attack against Constantinople but had failed. And I should throw in a quick footnote here, by the way, that a year ago, Pope Paul II apologized to the Eastern Orthodox world for the Fourth Crusade and the sack of Constantinople. Went there and made an apology. Went to the Middle East. And this year, on April the 15th, the 800th anniversary of the attack against Constantinople, the Patriarch of Constantinople publicly accepted the apology. These are important events. You're going, what? How can anything that happened before yesterday be important? Well, they are. We that live in the United States, it's only 200 years old, or if you go back to 1607 and the founding of Jamestown, we're just barely, not quite 300 years old. To talk about these kind of dates and these kind of time frames has to just blow us away. But that's exactly what we're doing. We're not looking here at something that was invented yesterday that's trying to meet somebody's current itch. What we're discussing then is this church that Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not destroy it, will not conquer it. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in our time together. And we're giving this overview here. But Constantinople had been so weakened that it never really fully survived its sack in 1204. It hung on for a couple hundred years, very weak. And in 1453, the Ottoman Turks, the Muslim Turks, attacked Constantinople and finally conquered the great city. Hagia Sophia was the Church of Holy Wisdom in Constantinople, the largest Christian building ever built, the most magnificent structure, Christian building ever built. The Muslims made it into a mosque. Since then, recently, it's been converted to a museum, so that if you were to travel to Constantinople today, you could actually see it, and pictures of the inside of it are found in many books. The Muslims, the Turks, changed the name from Constantinople, and today the name of the city is Istanbul. But let me show you something. As Paul Harvey would say, let me tell you the rest of the story. In the Middle East, Constantinople was a glorious city. And if you were going to go to Constantinople, you didn't say, I'm going to Constantinople. You said, I'm going to the city. Well, we live in the middle of Oklahoma, so we know what that means. If somebody says, if you don't live in Oklahoma City but live in Edmond or Guthrie or Mustang or Bethany, you don't say, I'm going to Oklahoma City. What do you say? I'm going to the city. That's just the way we talk here too. Well, they did the same in the Middle East. We're going to the city. And in the Greek language, to the city is Eis ten Poli, which in English alphabet is E-I-S-T-E-N-P-O-L-I. And if you use a guttural Arabic Turkish accent, Eis ten Poli became Istanbul. They're still calling it the same name. We're going to the city. That was free. There's no charge for that. If Regis ever asks you that question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, remember me. I'm going to have some fun. All right. With the sack of Constantinople in 1453, the center of Eastern Christianity moves to Moscow. This is where the seminaries are going to be located. This is where the priests are going to be trained. Moscow is called the Third Rome. First Rome was in Italy. The second Rome was Constantinople. Moscow is now the third Rome, the third capital of the Christian world. Once it became Christian under Constantine, second, and now the third. And the only way left for missionaries to be sent out was across eastern Russia, across Siberia, and you have Russian Orthodox. We always become independent churches inside the region. So you have the Russian Orthodox Church that begins fishing the waters off the coast of North America in the gulfs around what is today Alaska. Several of them end up being trappers in what is today Alaska. They will live with the native women and will ask that a priest come back the next time a ship comes to baptize their babies and to marry them. And so you begin to have priests who enter into Alaska, and a request is made of the Patriarch of Moscow to send clergy and missionaries to Alaska. And there's going to be a group of 8 or so that are on the eastern edge of Russia, near Finland, that are going to travel on the longest missionary journey in the history of Christianity, will travel over 8,000 miles across northern Russia and Siberia to arrive in Alaska and establish the first Orthodox Church in North America in 1794. Now, I realize that's after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But that is still a long time ago on North American continent. 1794. The name of the church is the Holy Church of the Holy Resurrection. It was established on Kodiak Island. Kodiak Island is the second largest island that is part of the United States. It is the size of the state of Connecticut. The island itself is. And the Church of the Holy Resurrection is still a practicing church to this very day. And the priest who came there to serve that church is St. Herman of Alaska. And his coffin is inside the church, and the heavy iron cross and the chains that carried it, that he wore, are there on top of his coffin to this day, that you might go and actually see them for yourself. One of the priests that came with St. Herman went into a different region, and as he was approaching a group of Indians, Eskimos, he was in his canoe, and as he stood up to get out, they fired arrows at him, being frightened. And they reported later that this man had great courage, that he was swatting away the arrows shot at him like a man would flies. What they did not know, because they had never seen it before, was he was making the sign of the cross as the arrows hit him. And those Indians thought he was swatting the arrows away like flies. He became the first Orthodox martyr, St. Juvenali, in North America. St. Peter the Alute was converted to Christianity, and the Russian presence went down the west coast of North America as far as California and got within 100 miles of San Francisco and established Fort Russ for the Russians, Fort Russ. And St. Peter the Alute went there upon a missionary journey, upon a trading journey rather, sorry. May have been St. Jacob. Forgive me if I'm wrong on the name, but I believe it was St. Peter the Alute, and they're there, and they are captured by a group of Spanish conquistadors, Spanish soldiers guarding California, who of course are part of the Roman Catholic faith at this time. And they will capture St. Peter the Alute and will attempt to convert him to Catholicism. And he tries to say, I am Christian, and makes the sign of the cross. And the way that the Orthodox Church makes the sign of the cross is different from the way Catholics make the sign of the cross, because after 1054, one of the things the Pope did after he created a new religion was to change how the sign of the cross was made. We'll have more to say about that in the weeks ahead. I didn't mean that as an advertisement and a tease, but I will hope that you come back so you can learn the difference in how the West and the East make the sign of the cross. Anyway, soldiers got so infuriated with him because he refused to make the sign of the cross their way that they began cutting off his hand one knuckle at a time. And after they had completely mutilated him and he still would not die, they cut him open and let him bleed to death. And so St. Peter the Aleut became the first native-born Orthodox saint in North America. There are 12 Orthodox saints in North America. And in our courtyard here, we have dedicated it to the All-American Saints. And we have the icon of those 12 saints and the story of how they became saints, one of whom was an Arab born in Syria who was educated in Greece and then was trained as a priest in Moscow. So he spoke Arabic, he spoke Greek, and he spoke Russian and Ukraine. He came to the United States and learned English and was the first Orthodox bishop ever consecrated on North American soil. His name was Bishop Raphael Hawawini, and he is one of those 12 Orthodox saints as well. Well, he's even mentioned there. We have him, sorry. It's in your notes there on the top of page 13. So there's an Orthodox presence that came into the United States from Russia. After the United States, Russia sold Alaska in 1867 to the United States, we took over the country, and the Russians still had oversight of the church there, but the church begins to need guidance, and we had patriarchs who came here. And St. Tikhon came to the United States as the Bishop of Alaska and was overseeing the work of the Orthodox Church in Alaska before he was elected Patriarch of Russia and went back to Moscow to serve there as the Patriarch of Moscow. So I'm wanting you to see that men who served God in North America and in the United States ended up going back to Russia and were the head of the church in Russia as well. It was St. Tikhon who had seen that Bishop Raphael was, and St. Innocent, that he was consecrated here and so forth. Simultaneous with that, I've got to hurry, you have the beginning of the collapse of the Ottoman Turkish Empire here. 450 years of Islamic rule begins to weaken, so that by the 1890s, some Christians are getting out, and they're coming to the United States, and they're making their way across the United States as peddlers. If you happen to see the musical Oklahoma, you will notice in it that the actor Eddie Albert plays an Arabic peddler. His name is Ali Hakim, and he's peddling and walking through with his wagon through Oklahoma, selling his goods, and that is the way it actually happened. Guthrie, Oklahoma, territorial capital of our state, founded in 1889 along with other cities in this part of our state, actually has an Arab named street in it. It's named, well, it's pronounced in Oklahoma, of course, at Mansur, but it's Mansour, which is an Arabic name. And if you were to look on our Flowers That Do Not Wither wall, where we have the names of the departed, you'll see many people who were once members of this church whose name was Mansour. And so we've got Mansur Street in Guthrie, Oklahoma, an Arabic presence here. They begin to come. And then World War I breaks out. And in the breaking out of World War I, all immigration to the United States stops. With the end of the war, because the Ottoman Turks sided with Germany, with the defeat of Germany, the Ottoman Turkish Empire is now going to be over, and the Christians make a mad dash out of the Middle East. They're going to leave what is today Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey. They're going to leave Greece, Romania. They all flood into the United States. In fact, so many come. And because they're not from Western Europe, where most of our immigration had come, it scared the old stock Americans at this point. Xenophobia, fear of strangers, set in. And in 1924, we closed our borders to immigration and did not reopen it for all intents and purposes until 1964. But in that brief window of opportunity, from 1918 to 1924, in that massive wave, millions of people came to the United States, and many of them were Orthodox Christians and brought their faith with them. They did not come as missionaries. They came as Christians trying to get a better life and here. And in 1920, a group of immigrants from southern Lebanon, a small village called Jadeda, in a region called Marjajun, Lebanon, thought they were strong enough that they wanted a church here in Oklahoma City. So they wrote a letter to their bishop back in Syria requesting that he send their village priest to them here in Oklahoma City. And he did that. And in October 1920, the village priest from back home arrived in Oklahoma City and conducted the first Orthodox worship service for that group in his living room down on 2nd Street in Oklahoma City. That group wanted to name themselves St. George because that was the name of their church back in Judea. But the Greek immigrants to Oklahoma City had already started their parish, and they had chosen the name St. George, and you do not have two parishes with the same name in the same city. And so therefore the Lebanese group chose the name St. Elijah because the village that St. Elijah had lived in, that you read about in the Old Testament in the book of Kings, was just nearby, was a nearby village, and so they knew the story of St. Elijah, and so they chose him as the patron saint of this church. That was in 1920, and here we are 84 years later, and the parish has moved here, and since 1987 in particular, by then we're into the second, third, fourth generation of immigrants. Everyone was beginning to speak English. Our services were in English since 1947, and by 1987, the rest of us who were Baptist and Methodist and Episcopalians and Charismatics and Assemblies of God and Roman Catholics, with all that was happening inside of American Christianity, got restless and started looking for a church that would not change. And in 1987, people began to find St. Elijah, one at a time, a trickle at a time, until the first year that we moved out here 7 years ago, when we had our annual food festival in November. Out of that crowd that came, over 3,000 visitors took a 30-minute tour of our facility in our chapel and in our sanctuary to learn about the Orthodox faith. And so it used to be said that the Orthodox Church was the best kept secret in America. Well, it's not quite that much of a secret anymore. I do not know how you found us, but I do not believe it is an accident that you have found us. I do not know what journey you are on in your life. I'm going to share in our weeks ahead the story of the Orthodox Church, and we're going to look at how that church, this church that started here and has remained the same, is different from this church over here that has gone its own way, particularly since 1054, and now has two versions, New Catholic and Old Catholic, or Protestant versions of it. I am not a hired gun. I'm not here to make enemies. I'd rather make friends than enemies. I will share the light with you that the church has to share. And if you're looking for knowledge and information, I think you will find that. And if you're looking for a church home, I know you can find that here. And if you're just wanting to be friends and are quite happy where you attend, that is wonderful. I still want us to be friends. We're not going to lock the doors and tie anybody down and make anybody convert. We just want to let you know who we are and allow you and your relationship to God to deepen and let Him guide you all the days of your life. So that's what we're going to do. And I want to thank you for being part of our evening together. And I hope to see you next week. Thank you.
From the heights thou didst descend, O compassionate one, and thou didst submit to the 3-day burial, that thou might deliver us from passion. Thou art our life and our resurrection, O Lord, glory to thee.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. From the heights thou didst descend, O compassionate one, and thou didst submit to the 3-day burial, that thou might deliver us from passion. Thou